I think that's it. Okay, welcome to Thinking Green remotely. Due to this surge in New London County and our state in general, we are pre-recording our Thinking Green shows until further notice. And as has been our tradition for several years now, Luther Weeks, the founder of CT Voters Count, is our guest, and we'll be talking about the election and what went well, what didn't go well, how we should plan for the future, and just generally about how to make sure our election system moving forward gets more and more secure and not less and less secure. So welcome, Luther.
Welcome.
And
I'm glad to be here. Your readers or viewers can see that we did this during the day on a beautiful day for the fall.
Well, so Luther, I guess before we start talking about the election, maybe we can start out by just giving a little summary of your organization and how you got it and why you got it started.
Well, I have two organizations. CT Voters Count, which is sort of more morphed into my blog, ctvoterscount.org. And that has a lot of my opinions about election integrity, and I try to keep them unbiased and nonpartisan. And then also ctelectionaudit.org, which is the Connecticut Citizen Election Audit. And that's focused on citizens observing our post-election audits. So maybe a little more than half the states, we have election audits after every election. And what makes those valuable or useful is citizens observing them and making our own independent analysis of those election audits. In fact, suddenly this year, there's a huge swell nationwide for people to observe election processes. So every step of our elections should be publicly observable, should be such that citizens can verify the results of the election, and that includes everything that goes into it. I mean, some states have video cameras on every election area, starting, a month before the election and 2 weeks after. So anytime somebody goes into the equipment to program it or test it or look at ballots, in that whole time, it's videotaped, okay? And now we're getting video observation of, let's say, counting absentee ballots starting around the country. It's not done very well, but it's great that people are doing it. There's some places that do exceedingly well at it. So if you got 20 tables or 100 tables doing absentee ballot processing, it doesn't help to have a video over. Oh, it helps a little to have a video over in the corner of the room so you can see what's going on a little bit. But you really need almost a video over every table of what everybody's doing. And you kind of need not less necessarily a Zoom, but something equivalent, like you have a dashboard, and people can tune into that dashboard and nobody knows which camera they're looking at any particular time. And maybe it's all recorded and you can look at it afterwards. So we're getting closer and closer to that. And for the first time, we actually have citizens being organized on a national level to observe observe the closing in every polling place and take a picture of the tape that comes out of the voting machine in every polling place. I mean, it's not enough people. It's nowhere enough people. It's not enough, but at least it's getting exciting people organizing for this nationally, and before we knew this was a close election and all that other stuff. So there's huge stuff going on. And I'd say in Connecticut, as far as I know, we were the most and are the most successful citizens group observing post-election audits. Our audits aren't great, but at least they're there. And, we observe more of them. I know people that observe very carefully in other states, but there's only one or two observers. They can't go to 50 or 100 or, 1,000 counties and observe everything. They can't even observe the post-election audits like we've been doing. So it's a huge thing. It's one thing, to have freedom and observability. It's another thing to actually make that work and make it useful.
And I guess one thing we'll talk about a little bit later is what ways technology can help our elections and which ways technology might not be a service to good
Sure.
election practice. But before we get to
I'd love to
that,
talk about absentee ballots sometimes and all the issues associated with that.
funny thing, that was number 2 on my list, which is
great.
in the 2020 elections,
Yeah.
issues that came to light because of the large number of absentee ballots submitted
Sure.
relative to most years. And it seemed like they came under, different categories. It stressed our capacity, it stressed our security, and it stressed our uniformity. And if you'd like to address all of those
Sure.
one at a time or together, that'd be great.
Well, and let's take a Connecticut perspective in each case and then widen it out to the bigger world. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah. First, the good news. I think the Connecticut registrars of voters, as far as I know, uniformly stepped up to do a good job and get it done in a timely manner. Okay. I was really concerned going into the election that some of our registrars of voters would do a great job and others would do a terrible job. I don't think our Secretary of State or Rovac looked like they were helping, especially the Secretary of State, because my understanding directives kept changing day to day, right up, until election day, maybe a day before, or maybe a few days after even. And so the registrars had to react to this. They kept having to change procedures and, innovate and try and react. And I don't think that, uniformity you mentioned, that's the big problem. It's a big risk. And in Connecticut, I think that was a big problem. But hopefully, because our results are so clear that certainly, at the scale of our, president and state representatives, and this is true in many other states, except the very close ones. The results are so overwhelming that little glitches and ununiformity don't matter. Okay. But in a very close election, and possibly some of our state house races or Senate races that are very close, there could be things that could have been much better. Okay, and let's let me adjust the camera here a little bit. Maybe I'll look a little better. I don't know. So I think they did a great job. I haven't heard of any problems anywhere. Our traditional problems with election day registration causing lines in New Haven and Hartford and Bridgeport, I haven't heard that there was any big problems.
There was a directive this year, wasn't there, that people in line by 8 o'clock had to be allowed to vote?
Yeah, and I think that was started last year, or but it wasn't that. It was the miles of long lines that discouraged people, and to keep causing people to think that there's long lines everywhere in Connecticut. Now, there were some long lines in Connecticut on election day, but that was similar to other states where you saw these pictures of long lines and early voting on the first day. And I don't think those were caused by errors on the part of election officials in general. They were caused because people are so enthusiastic they showed up on the first day, and they showed up at it, before 6 a.m. in Connecticut. For the most part, those lines were, solved in a short period of time. Here, I can't answer for every other state, and there's a variety of reasons, but you can't, as an election official, predict the turnout all the time. In California in August, and I don't know about now, this election, 70% of their votes were done, by mail-in. And 70% of their votes that weren't mail-in were on election day. But they had 11 days of early voting. And only 26, 28% of their votes were early voting in 11 days. So if all of a sudden a whole bunch of enthusiastic people show up on day one, or even show up over the course of 11 days, you probably haven't planned for that very well because you didn't expect it. So I think that was the long line story this year in most cases. I'm not saying all, but it certainly was in Connecticut as far as I know. But anyway, overall they did a good job. But here's the problem with absentee balloting. And it's the same problem nationwide. Now, I'm a little concerned about absentee balloting because that's where all the organized cheating occurs. Not voter fraud, but voting fraud, and including in Connecticut. Okay, now I have no evidence that there's been a lot of it in Connecticut. I doubt there was.
Bridgeport does have a reputation, though.
Yeah, it was. We had some collusion in Stamford a couple of years ago between a former party official and the town clerk of the opposite party that did it for a couple of elections. Well, one of them is under federal indictment right now, and the other one is turned state's evidence. We have it ongoing in Hartford, particularly one state representative that has supporters. And in Connecticut, it's especially easy to steal local elections. It's harder to steal statewide elections. Okay. Very hard. And statewide elections are represented, House of Representative elections even. But not very easy on local elections if you got a couple people of insiders colluding or local referendums. Very easy. It doesn't happen very often that they're successful, but apparently they were successful in Stamford until they got caught. But nationwide, every state is different. Once again, on a global level, that, makes it harder to steal a federal election, except when you get a few states that are very close. Okay. And absentee voting, we learned this time, hopefully everybody's learned it's different in every state. And maybe there's some good things in other states that Connecticut doesn't have in that. And there's good things in Connecticut that other states don't have. So I'll give you what I think is one of the worst examples in Connecticut. And that's what's called curing. And so curing is, so when you send in an absentee ballot, in some states, 4% of those or so are rejected because the voter likely made a mistake. In Connecticut, in normal years, it's like 2%. In this election, magically, it was like 0.4%. And we can talk about why. That's good news. That's good news that, okay, but there's multiple reasons for that. Curing is the process by which if an absentee ballot would be rejected, that the voter is contacted and given an opportunity to, quote, cure it. Okay. So that was one of the things that was changed sort of back and forth by the Secretary of State at the last minute. And she allowed towns to cure it. So that means, let's say that, you're detect that a vote wasn't signed. The voter didn't sign it, or they left their ballot outside of the inner envelope, or they didn't supply the inner envelope. So that's a process where you could contact that voter and have them say, oh, that really was my ballot. I'll come in and sign it, or whatever, whatever you want them to do. Okay. But, my understanding is some towns cured and some didn't. That's unfair. And my understanding is, the exact rules and guidelines and how to do it and all that didn't really have good standards. So let me give you a story here. I'm in a rich, small, relatively small town or suburb of Fairfield County. So, I got 10 ballots to cure in my town. I figure out half the cures, 5 days before Election Day. I figure out the other the other 5 on Election Day. And I look at the ballots and I got to, but I look at the voters and the phone numbers are all out of date or the emails are out of date, but I can get a hold of a few of them by calling them. But I can't contact those other ones. Well, some of those towns have it that when they're find those errors, they call out the names of the voters. So if you're a smart party and you knew this was going on, you have people there listening and they can figure out where the voters are from their party and get them to cure. Well, and here we got Bridgeport or Hartford or New Haven, and they're inundated with ballots and they're trying to keep up. And they're a day and a half behind. They don't have time to call anybody. They don't have time to deal with this. And they got worse quality of phone numbers and emails. Okay. And what's the standard? When do you get to cure it? I don't mind somebody coming in 2 days later and say, yeah, that's my signature, I'll sign it. But they better not be able to provide a new ballot after Election Day, 8 p.m. So what we need is standards for all this. And here's the deal. In California, they have cures and they've been doing it for years and they probably have standards. But here's the problem. The first thing is they wait 2 weeks to get a ballot in that was postmarked by Election Day. Then what you got to do is when you discover somebody needs a cure, you got to send them a letter. You might call them and email them, but you got to send them a letter. They got to have time to get that letter. And they got to have a fair chance to do a cure. And what about people with disabilities? Which, by the way, older people and people with disabilities is probably why we normally had 2%. Then they rejected, and now we had 0.4% because we had younger, more aware, younger meaning 60 or under, or they're not demented, people that can do the cure and not even need a cure. Okay. The reason why they have more cures in other states is because they do signature man, which is a ridiculous error-prone process, by the way. And we can talk a little more about signatures and their value and unvalue later. So if Connecticut wanted to do cures, and we want to do things like not accept, giving some time to accept votes that aren't in by 8 p.m., we gotta have an extra month here in the process. We can delay things like recanvases and certification and all that. That requires huge changes in our laws. It doesn't say accept absentee ballots for X many days after the election and do a cure for 2 weeks. It's got to move everything out, including municipal elections. You would have to change the date that some people take office because, I don't know why they do this, but, in my town, you have a November election and they take office in January. But in
In
other
my
towns,
town-
they have an election and they take office in, before the end of November. So all I'm saying is it's a lot to change. And, I'm not against basically what Connecticut law is now for absentee ballots. They got to be in the hands of the registrar of voters by midnight, or not midnight, by 8 p.m. on election day. Okay. I mean, I could say, oh, maybe midnight, give the post office a little more time or something. And then we don't match signatures. But signatures are good because forensically after the election, that's how they caught those perpetrators in Stanford. They could tell that the signatures were the same hand on all those ballots and all those absentee applications. And afterwards, they could figure out who did it and they could penalize them big time. So signatures have value. I'm against getting rid of signatures, but signature matching, whether it's by computer or, poll worker kind of people, that's no good. Forensics takes a lot. And it's especially hard in this day and age when you're matching to a electronic signature captured at the DMV on some kid who doesn't even know how to do cursive anymore, or some old person that signed it 20 years ago, 40 years ago. And even a forensic expert would have a lot of fun with that, saying whether it's good or bad.
And it seems to me everything, people are already complaining with this presidential election that results, were delayed. I think we've gotten so used to everything being instantaneous. And you're talking about a process that would make things move much slower. So are Americans ready for that?
Right. Well, there are, I mean, it's a standard human trait. We kind of look at, one thing at a time in one direction at a time here. And, we don't see the whole picture. Okay. So somebody says, oh, I came down with a cold Sunday before the election, and I was supposed to be counting absentee ballots. So I said, I'm not going to be there. Well, people were concerned that I had COVID. And so, by the way, I had a couple COVID tests and, I had nothing wrong. I knew it was a cold, but, I reassured them before the town went crazy. But one of the good things is I was home on election day and saw some of the local news. And in one polling place, the voting machine, stopped. It wouldn't collect ballots, or it wouldn't when they started it in the morning. By the way, this has happened once in a while since 2006 when we acquired these machines. So the whole story is we got to replace all our machines in Connecticut because of this terrible thing that this one machine crapped out. And then the moderator was a genius because a half an hour later, they instructed people to put the ballots in the side of the machine while they got a new machine in. By the way, that's standard operating procedure. It should have happened immediately. Okay. And then somebody at the end of the segment says, yeah, these are so old machines, they're not even connected to the internet. Nobody wants electronic voting machines connected to the internet. It's a crazy idea. The other thing is they think that they could get immediate results that way. So it took a long time for the Secretary of State's office to get it, but they finally built a good election day reporting system. And what they do is they take the tapes and they go back to the office and they type them in at night. In my town, we have 60 election officials or so working 17-hour days. 2 guys come in for 5 hours and they type all the results in. So it's cheap. And by the way, 2/3 of the results in Connecticut are hand-counted data that has to be typed in anyway. So all you take is the machine counts. So I was on Facebook and somebody said, oh no, we don't have election results from our election results system yet. And this was a day after the election. And somebody from the Secretary of State's office responded, well, we don't show them till it's certification time. Well, that's outrageous. And it wasn't the purpose of the system. And I said, so much for election night reporting system. Well, a half hour later, they finally had them up. They're available any old time. It's just they might not be accurate, you know, until people check them over. But, you know, so we got an election night reporting system. They can show the results, so they're there, you know, the morning after the election, even if they're highly checked by each town. Sooner if you, you know, don't care about accuracy so much. But no different if you took, let's say, a thumb drive and brought them to headquarters and uploaded them, which would be a fine solution too. But you still got to do the other 2/3. And a lot of our election systems nationwide have problems with the idea of taking thumb drives and totaling the results, because the systems don't always work right. You can miss one without knowing it, one of those thumb drives. You can read the same one in twice. Or is what happened, I think it was Georgia and some other state, which is a standard problem. They changed the election definition on the thumb drives and the voting machines, but they didn't change it on the machine that accumulates the results, and they got the wrong results. It shouldn't have happened. If they had a well-written system, it wouldn't happen that way. I mean, without it telling you and puking and not taking that district, you know, until you straighten it out. That's, you know, those are some of the things that we constantly have to worry about. I think we've been getting better every year in Connecticut. Our machines are old, but they work well still. We monitor that. Connecticut Citizen Election Audit monitors by interviewing registrars after every election how the machines are working. Back 2 or 3 years ago, it looked like they weren't working so well. What it was is bad maintenance, apparently, because they're still working as good as they did in 2006. Wow. That's not going to go on forever. You know, we're going to, but by the way, our machines are a drug on the market. You can buy them, used ones, for $10 a piece. So there's no lack of parts out there for these machines, you know, and stuff. But one day we'll have to replace them. But what people don't realize, the new ones are incrementally better, but they cost more. And you got to use twice as many of them because they run slower. So we never have a problem. There's maybe 1 polling or 2 polling places in Connecticut that I know of that should have more than 1 scanner, because they can keep up with a huge. Now, I would say we bought 2 for each place. We ought to have the second one fired up, which we generally don't do. So if something happens to the first one, we just go over and start using the second one. We take all the ballots out of the first one and we put them in to the second one, so they all, you know. But it's not time for us to we ought to maybe be looking at things and thinking about replacing them. But we got new federal standards coming out. I hate to say the way the federal governments work, whether they'll be out next year or they'll be out, you know, later this year. Okay, they won't be out later this year, but they might be out next year. But it works slow. Our machines sort of meet the 2002 standards. Wouldn't it be nice if they met, 2020 standards? And if those standards were better than the standards we have now, if we went and bought them and spent, the Secretary of State estimated $30 million to replace our voting machines.
Now we're just looking to replace.
I think that might be a little high, but I mean, I'd rather have her estimate high than low when it comes to money. And I think that we ought to be looking at them, but I'm not sure it's time to replace them yet, because I always have this crazy hope that we'll have really better voting machines to be able to buy.
Now in Connecticut, we're just looking to replace tabulators, right? We're not thinking of
optical scanner.
Okay, yeah. A friend of mine moved to Philadelphia a couple years ago, and this election was the first one they had voted absentee,
right?
And they were quite shocked that the absentee ballot there looked entirely different. You know, they had BMDs there.
Yeah. Well, the
And
absentee looking different. There's a lot of better ballots or scanning than Connecticut uses, and this has nothing to do with their machines. It has to do with our archaic state law that has the ballots look like lever machines. Pictures.
I'm with you on that.
We don't have the lever on there, but I mean, we got everything else.
We do. Well, we don't have the party line.
No, we don't have that anymore. And some states have that. But like New York, we have, a lever look. I think New York's the only other one. We have a lever look ballot. So most states have a much better, you can have worse than we have, but most states have a much better ballot than we have. From the standpoint of the ballot voter filling it out better, using the real estate of the ballot better, and being a little more nonpartisan than ours are, But the trouble with, I believe Philadelphia did this, and a lot of Georgia did this. They bought what's called ballot marking devices, or BMDs. So that's where you go up to a touch screen and you make your selections. And it prints out a very small piece of paper, very similar to like the totals things on our optical scanners.
Like the tapes.
Yeah, it's like a little tape. It might be a little bigger than that, depending on the machine. So the first thing, these cost 2 or 3 times what it cost to do optical scanners over the lifetime of the machines, including the cost of buying ballots like we have to every year. So they're spending 2 or 3 times as much money. So instead of, let's say, Connecticut spending, $30,000 to buy machines, maybe we'd have to spend $80,000 or $90,000. And the maintenance of those machines is that much higher because you got to program, lots more machines for every election. And they're slower for voting. Okay, when we have a line, it's like it's usually like they didn't set up enough checkoff lines for people to and they can be manually expanded with a couple more people. Don't cost us much money. But the voting machines keep up with the lines. In these other places, they don't have enough of them in some places. When they get hit by a lot of voters, you can't just make a new line. You only got so many BMDs. And if a few of the BMDs crap out, it's that much slower. But the worst thing about a BMD is they supposedly let the voter verify their vote. Well, it's been proven by studies first that maybe at most 10% of voters actually even look at their ballot, quote ballot, the thing that prints out. But then secondly, a lot of voters don't know who they voted for. They go in there and they don't know what races they're actually they know who's running for president, hopefully. But they don't know who their senator is. They don't know who their state senators, representative, or town council. They don't know who they are. So they scratch their head for a long time and then they vote for somebody or other. And this printout comes out. Well, they're not qualified to remember for 5 minutes who they voted for because they don't know. Well, if something's wrong with the machine or it was intentionally jimmied with, then, if it only accurately does one side and 20% of the other side, it switches the ballot. Most of the voters aren't even going to go and say, oh, there's something wrong with this and I need to vote again. And most of them are going to say, well, I screwed up. And some are going to go to the election official and say, look at this machine screwed up. Well, the election official's not going to believe them because they're going to think they voted wrongly. And a lot of times the election official will be right in that belief. So you can go vote again, but you can't prove the machine really screwed up. And, they're very dangerous in that sense, and they're not what they claim to be. officials love them because they print out the results from those machines and the scanning, and there's almost no dispute available. There's no mistakes made because people don't fill in the bubbles exactly right. But yeah, it's dangerous to democracy, and it's also dangerous to our purse.
I think it was last year, I was observing an audit, and when the story broke that in Eastern Pennsylvania, there was a wild discrepancy in a local election, and the Democrat who had been favored to win had only been recorded to have like under a couple hundred votes out of 55,000, which triggered them to, use their backup paper recanvass.
Yeah.
And it turned out the guy who at the first counting only had a couple hundred votes won the election. And those who love those machines said, "Oh, it proves the system works," but had to be a really outrageous discrepancy to even trigger the recanvass. I mean, if they had him losing narrowly, no one really would have thought twice that it might have been the machines that weren't working.
Especially in a local race. In my town, we had no polling, but we thought we had a very close representative race for good reasons. And, one candidate won by 1,500 votes. Okay. And I'm not saying that didn't happen or there's anything wrong with that, but we had no idea. If the other candidate had won by 100 votes, we probably would have believed it. And there wouldn't have been a recanvass because it's far enough apart. Is Rhode Island a few years ago, they had some kind of proposition on the ballot. And I don't know, let's say yes, let's say no one. A few thousand votes or something like that. But then somebody looked at it and they figured out that the scanners had been misprogrammed and they switched the yes and the no column or something like that. So I helped Rhode Island out last year. I one of many people that helped them out creating a risk limiting audit. We did a pilot last year ago, January. But they wouldn't have had an audit, and they're going to do an audit after re-election now. And they wouldn't have had any audit, except I'm going to move my thing here a little bit, but they wouldn't have any audit at all. Let me try and get this a little bit. They wouldn't have had any audit at all, except that they were burnt by that error. Okay. And, they realized they got to do something like that. But that can happen, especially if it happens in like a local race. Nobody knew what was going to happen. Or if it's a referendum on the budget and all the insiders on both sides say, hey, we want to win this. Because if the right people showed up to ballot, of course we'd win. Or there's one guy in town hall that said, you should see the waste in this place. If the right people showed up to vote, this budget would be turned down. Let me make sure, the result is as if the right people had shown up, so that's why we gotta be skeptical, always skeptical to a point. Okay. And it's not officials, it's not accusing poll workers to say the machines might have screwed up any more than it is accusing veterans if you disagree with a foreign policy. Okay, that's a scheme, a PR scheme to,
Now, there was a bill that came up in the Connecticut special session recently related to voting, if I understand right. Or I don't know.
Well, there was a bill that came up that passed to allow us to do absentee voting in November because they were concerned about because in August we did it with Lamont's special powers, which he extended after that, but I mean, it feels a little more comfortable, I guess, to people that the legislature passed. So that's something that
I think
passed
that's
in
true.
special session. I don't think anything else came up. Now there was pressure for more, that bill to be bigger or more, for absentee voting to be have some additional things, which I thought were well intended but dangerous.
You
Uh-oh.
did.
There you go.
What kind of additional things were people thinking about?
I'm trying to think of what they were. But there were some of the things that some of the other states do, which, really need a full vetting in Connecticut. And they need things like changing lots of parts of the law. So all the parts work together. It may have been accepting ballots long after election day, for example, or I don't know, maybe a longer cure. I forgot what it was, but there were a couple of things in there that I said, these are things that other states do, but they have huge implications that people don't understand. I mean, some of these things that people propose, they just don't understand how it all fits into our election laws, and it's not a thing that you can, easily change. That kind of thing.
I've heard so many people talking about how, we really need online voting, and and the assumption is, we do online banking, we do online shopping.
Sure.
So why can't we do online voting? And
well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of answers to that. The first one, by the way, online banking is a much easier and safer application because you get the paper receipt, and there's money involved. So it's easier to track if somebody's stealing money in that, or something went wrong electronically, because you got the receipt. And by the way, banks lose billions of dollars every year through fraud on ATM, especially in ATMs or online banking. The only difference is they save much more money by saving all those clerks and other things. So they willingly pay for the fraud they get stuck with. I mean, they like to stop it, and they try and stomp it out and arrest people and all that. But online banking doesn't work as well, and many banks don't like having businesses, especially big businesses, do that because they lose big money with big businesses. Okay. They could steal all my money in the bank. It's minor for a bank. I mean, it'd be huge for me. They steal $25 from me. It's small for me and small for the bank. But the other side of it is, electronic anything through the internet is risky. I mean, the U.S. government probably has the top security of any place, the military and all that. They get hacked. Small businesses get hacked all the time. Big businesses get hacked. Banks get hacked. Okay. So if they can't protect it, how can your registrar protect it? I couldn't protect it. I'm not I know about security. I know some things about electronic security, but I'm not some internet security expert and all that. All I know is the experts tell me they can't protect any of this stuff. And by the way, where they've tried it, there's no huge spike in the number of voters voting by internet. Okay. Any young person that's familiar with Facebook and other things on the internet, do they trust the internet? I don't think so. They probably trust it less than you and I do correctly. Okay.
Well, I think it's interesting that ever since this idea of electronic voting got started, the people who are most knowledgeable about computers and technology are the biggest skeptics, and the people who just use it as a tool and don't really know much about the inside. Yeah, it is interesting though that there's such trust on the part of people who don't really know much about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've been seeing this actually for 15 years. It isn't something new that, the people who are into technology are more skeptical than just, the people on the
Sure.
street.
Well, there's a mistrust of expertise all over the lot, and it varies. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't trust the expertise on COVID and COVID vaccines and masks, but the people that are in favor of internet voting is a different cut because you have this confirmation bias, and especially if you're not a knowledgeable expert. Okay. Everybody says, oh, it's impossible to do this, it's impossible to do that. Well, that's because you individually could not do it. That there's a gazillion people that could do it. And you could hire one if you were, if you wanted to do it, or you could threaten the lives of their children or spouses or parents or whatever. You could get it done.
Now, this year, well, I won't even say this year, a couple years ago, talking about the audits, post-election audits, the state started using electronic audits in some places or making them available.
Yeah.
Is this year's COVID, distancing mandate increasing the use of these electronic audits, or what's happening this year?
I don't know. What they've tended to do in the last few years is do more and more of them in the November elections and not bother with them in the primaries. Because the primary is you audit less, you have much less votes, very easy audit by hand. But in the November election, it's much more complicated. Whether it's a local election or it's a state or federal election. And so they've been doing it more and more. I've been a proponent of electronically assisted manual audits since the beginning. And in fact, I would take credit for being a catalyst nationally for that happening. I didn't think of the idea, but I was actually a catalyst in really helping that take off. Unfortunately, in Connecticut, they went halfway. They did the electronic part of the audit, but not the part about manually assisted electronic audit. However, I've been having conversations, and Connecticut Citizen Election Audit has been critiquing the way they do it. And they actually prototyped for us and showed in the last 2 Novembers, better and better understanding and capability for doing, that electronically assisted manual audit. They aren't there yet, and we every year give them a formula of how they can get there. And what it is you do an electronic audit. With a better kind of machine than we use in our polling place scanners. Not good for a polling place scanner, but good for rescanning the ballots. And it gives you the capability of randomly selecting a small number of ballots and verifying that electronic audit was, so that you can have confidence in it. I hate using terms that sound technical that aren't. And you almost have to have a PhD in statistics to state some of these things in a way that would satisfy a statistician. Okay. But for the public, I'll give that explanation that I gave. If you saw the right way of doing it, any common sense person would probably agree that that's a very good way to do it. So I'm confident that I'm hopeful that they keep moving in that direction, and we reach a point in Connecticut where they actually do it in a way that I would trust and recommend the public trust. And they're so close. And the answer is it's a much more reliable way of doing it. It's much easier on the registrars to do it. It takes much less time. And from my standpoint, for the public, I could give you a much stronger guarantee that our machines were not hacked and the count on the ballots, was accurately done. Or if it wasn't, we would have found out, and we would find out. And I'm not saying that we even with the audits the way they are now, we occasionally find some problems with that. And by our highlighting them, they happen less and less. And I would hope it's because we highlight them, because I don't know how in the heck anybody else in the world would know unless we highlight them, because the system itself doesn't. The system, which is people and laws and machines, doesn't highlight those errors.
So do you feel optimistic about what direction we're going in, that in 5 years, will we be there?
Beware. Well, I'm hoping as far as these audits go, I'm hoping as far as these audits go, that we'll be there this year. But that's up to the Secretary of State's office. We've given them how to do it. I don't know, a silver platter, maybe, whatever. But I mean, and I'm not saying what I would say is sufficient, that every voting integrity person in the country would agree. But I would agree that it's sufficient. But we got to go. I mean, no more work except designing it right. No more work, 10 minutes more in a 2-hour process. It could be a 12-hour process in the past, that kind of thing. It's like typing it in at night, even less so. Typing it in the data at night after an election is so little part of the job. To say that is something wrong with that, or it's too much work, it's crazy. And it delays things too much. It's just, it's completely misaligned with the actual facts on the ground.
Now we have about 5 more minutes left. So I was wondering if you talked a little bit about our ballot design, and
Yep.
I thought I might screen share a little and just show people what different ballots might look like, because we're so accustomed to what we see.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to start with a real abuse of our Connecticut ballot. Yeah, let's see if I can find this. I've got.
Oh, no. Do you have some of the pictures I've written on it and some of the drawings I've done?
No, but
the devil ears on some of the things that things that I filled in, the unsmiley faces on some of those.
This might actually be worse. Okay, so this ballot in our New London municipal elections was given to senior citizens at an annual spaghetti dinner that's hosted by the Democrats. And they actually whited out the names of all the candidates that weren't on line A.
Yeah.
And we found out about it because here in, I think it was 9C, was supposed to be Myrna Martinez running for Board of Education. And her mom was at the senior citizen dinner and came home and said, Myrna, I thought you were running for office. And Myrna said, Mom, of course I'm running. And Mom showed her this ballot.
I doubt that's an official ballot.
It is not, but it wasn't marked that it was a sample. It wasn't, and we're talking seniors, so some of them, and it's a really bad whiteout job too. You can see smudges.
I mean, it's like.
However,
I don't know. Well, first of all, why did they fill in the ovals on all those other ones? It's even a bad job. It's a bad job all around. I mean,
it's a bad job all around.
Left those other ovals unfilled in.
Yeah,
or why not the oval along with the name? I mean,
or they didn't white out the oval. I don't know, but
it's crazy.
Looking at other ballots from other places, I think it would be actually even a little more, this I thought was pretty obvious, but if you
Yeah.
have some random other ballots, I don't know which one is this one.
Albany. Well, this is
This is a
New
more-
York State. It's the lever ballot. It's a New York State
Oh.
ballot. And if it was in New York City, they'd have to have three
Oh, wait a
languages in
minute.
each one of those
Okay.
boxes.
I've
the
got a
candidate
bunch here.
name.
Yeah, that one is,
I don't-
so this one is really confusing as well.
Right. It's basically
So we don't have the only
it's
bad
basically a
one.
Connecticut ballot. It's just a little different format of a lever.
Yeah, they have the offices going vertically and the parties
Yeah.
going horizontally.
Yeah,
but
well,
they
you could
look
do
the
that with. I
same.
think you could probably do that with a lever machine. You wouldn't even have to set it on side.
So New York really isn't where we want to go.
No.
But there are some others. Let me find, not that one. That one's Albany. This one's Georgia. I'm going to just.
Okay, this is great. This is much better. This is known as a nonpartisan. I've heard of this called a nonpartisan ballot. Even though you got people's names, parties on there, if you want to vote straight Democratic or Republican or Green, you got to search for the candidate.
Right.
Now,
And if
I don't
people-
know how this works with fusion voting. Now, you probably know what fusion voting means.
I do. And
That's where somebody gets endorsed by two parties.
actually, I
So
was
how
a
do you
fusion
indicate on this?
candidate.
I think it's unfair to have your name on this ballot twice. Once
agree.
for Green and once for Republican or whatever it is. But on the other hand, how do you say which party somebody is when they're double endorsed? So I don't know. I'd like to see it.
I would think that what you would
there's this
do.
organization called Civic Design.
Civic Design.
You want to look it up sometime.
Yeah.
And it's mainly run by these two women that I know.
Hmm.
And they have pamphlets for election officials and commentary on the design of ballots and other things. And they do a very reasonable thing. They take two ballots and they go and they have voters and focus groups look at the ballots and ask the voters questions about the ballots.
Hmm.
And they could improve our lever voting machine ballot by a lot, they claim. I don't know how, but they can. But they look at all sorts of ballots, and there's so many things that you can improve on them. And they have guidelines for good designs of ballots. I don't know if this one's a good one or not, but you know what? I see on the left the president, and then the state senate.
Right.
But the U.S. House is way down on the bottom on the right.
Yeah, this isn't perfect either.
Right.
But
That's what I'm just saying. I'm not so sure. I mean, if you want something to be down ballot, it should be down ballot. The higher level offices ought to be, to the top. Maybe not all on the left, but they ought to be towards the top. So people see them. Yeah, and I don't like that they don't have they just have a line between them. It's almost better like if you got a box for each office. By the way, you can do a lot more on some of these ballots in the same amount of space. If you look at our lever ballot, look at how much space is wasted. If there's 3 petitioning candidates for one office, that's 3 more rows in there, and then everything but that one office is all blank. So we waste a lot of our ballot in there, and everything fitting into a square rather than maybe a little rectangle.
Well, this is my
your
favorite
name.
ballot, is the Washington, D.C. one. I like the idea that things are, everything is clear. And also the order of the candidates seems to be randomized. It isn't always the same party on top.
Those are all good.
So this one,
people here talk about ranked choice voting, so that makes a change in this too. The fusion would make a change for it in Connecticut. I don't understand that. A ranked choice voted maybe make a difference, but I could understand how that could be put on here.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge to make a paper ballot. By the way, it's a challenge to make a computer screen, no matter how big it is.
That's true.
so it doesn't somehow mislead voters. We had something like that in the last primary nationally, where they couldn't fit everybody in one race on one screen, and it was it was just a mess. Because of the way it was programmed, because it wasn't obvious to voters, it really hurt some candidates.
Well, you mentioned fusion voting, and I was a fusion candidate in 2009. I was cross-endorsed by the New London Republican Party, even though they knew my platform was not that much similar to theirs, but they thought at least my votes wouldn't be dictated by the party machine in town. So they cross-endorsed me. I got elected for one term.
Wow.
And I think on one of these other type ballots, if you had that kind of cross-endorsement under the single name, you could just put both party endorsements, Ronna Steller, Green.
Right. And we wouldn't have to have this. I mean, if we go to ranked choice voting or something like that, we got to change our laws for eligibility to get on that ballot. Because that's why you want to have on the ballot the Working Families Party and the Green Party and all these other parties, and have a separate vote for them, because they got to have a right to stay on the ballot. And it makes a big difference in that regard. But that's an example of, you can't change one thing. You got to change a lot.
Yes. And I think with ranked choice voting, right now in Connecticut, the only place it's really being considered, being addressed, is in primary elections, which are only all Democrats or all Republicans. As a pilot, I felt like, when our New London changed to a mayoral system of government, the Charter Commission actually wanted to put in place that the mayor needed to be approved by majority, without specifying whether it would be a separate runoff or eventually an instant runoff. And we had 6 candidates. And I thought on a local level wouldn't be a bad pilot, because we only have 3 voting places plus City Hall.
Right.
Chain of custody of ballots is sort of manageable.
You have to define it very clearly. I mean, I think it's easiest to do in a municipality, easiest with 1 polling place, but not too bad with 3. But you got to be very clear, because instant runoff voting does not result in a majority winner. It results in a majority of those left voting in the final round.
That's true, but I have to say, if you have a separate runoff, there are people who vote in the main election don't show up, and that's how I kind of see it.
I agree with you, Ronna. I agree with you, but all I'm saying is it's very important to define it clearly. So these people all running around Connecticut say, a majority winner. They're wrong. It's not a majority winner. It's the majority of those still voting in the final round. Now, I have no particular,
and the charter would have
particular horse in that race, but people got to be very careful what they say. And I'm very concerned that, let's say, the national I don't like the national popular vote. I'd like to have the popular vote under the right circumstances.
Yeah.
But I don't like the national popular vote compact. But compounding it, if you were to run the presidential election for electors or whatever in Connecticut or any one state by instant runoff voting, well, there's nothing that defines which round counts for the popular vote in other states when they're determining the national popular vote winner. And all that means is more reason for lawsuits and confusion, because a ranked choice voting law in Connecticut might be able to change that if it specifies it, but maybe not, because we got this national popular vote compact that's written in granite and does not address that.
And I am concerned about the national popular vote compact. I mean, I'd love to get rid of the Electoral College. completely. Gaming the electoral college system, sometimes
Sure.
I'm not always, I'd rather have a good system than have a poor system that you
Right.
feel like gaming the system is your only option.
Right.
I feel that way about fusion voting in a way. I was a beneficiary of it, but I only felt like I had to do it because otherwise no one but Democrats will get into office in New London. So there was a need to sort of game that system, but I'd rather not have to go that route.
I'd like to
It'd
think
be better to have a good system.
know what a great person you are. Let's leave it at that. Anyway, that's another possibility, and maybe it make you happier. But yeah, the problem with the National Popular Vote Compact is we got a system that's not uniform state by state. People tell me all of Europe votes by essentially a national popular vote, and I said sure. They say we're the only country without that, and I say yeah, but we're the only country where every state has its own rules, and we can't do that. That doesn't make every vote equal.
No.
And every citizen equal, because different people can vote here than can vote in Florida. It's harder for some people to vote here than some other places, and vice versa. You got to make, and it would make gaming the system a different kind of gaming the system. So so the right answer, unfortunately, is very hard to do right now, but maybe a generation from now will be easier. But you got to have a national constitutional amendment, and it can't just say national popular vote. It's got to say that there's got to be a uniform system and uniform federal control of who gets the vote and how they get the vote. There's got to be a national audit and recount and that kind of stuff. Or it's just another thing that's probably worse of, fight and argument than we have, when we should and when we shouldn't at different presidential elections.
Well, I guess to close this out, if you could tell people how to get in touch with CT Voters Count.
You just go to our website, ctvoterscount.org, or Connecticut Citizen Election Audit, ctelectionaudit.org, or you can just email me, Luther@ctvoterscount.org or Luther@ctelectionaudit.org. And I guarantee you I'm not inundated with emails from people who are actually concerned about voting integrity.
So it would be good if you got a few more.
Always good to have a few more people concerned that, we can verify our elections here. I mean, by Thursday this week, I guarantee you half the people in Connecticut had no interest whatsoever in this because they were convinced everything was done on the up and up. And, next November, who knows, it might be half the people again. It's a little more than half the people after each election that are pretty happy with the results of, that's one thing for sure.
Yeah. And we have some time to think about how to make things a little bit better over the next few years. We're still sort of waiting with bated breath in the US a little bit, even though people have relaxed some. But I think that the more people generally have confidence in our electoral system, then the less we have to worry about things like, frivolous complaints.
It takes an automaker 6 or 8 years to build a new car. Okay, the electronics in my car, when it was brand new, were way behind because it was built over a 6-year cycle.
Wow.
But you know what? We got to move our elections. You can't get excited about it 3 months before an election and change anything in a good way. Okay. And if we're not working on it, something to improve our elections right after the 2002 election, we're not going to improve them for the next presidential election. If we're not working on it within 6 months from now, it's shoot from the hip. It's risky to change it in a significant way before the 2002 elections.
So really what we need is planning, not reaction.
Right. Well, I mean, reaction tomorrow that we start planning in a reasonable way.
Yes.
And that we don't end up in 2004 with election equipment standards from 2002. That we, have some updated ones, hopefully good ones. And we don't spend millions of dollars buying something that's that outdated.
Oh. Well, thank you, Luther. I recommend to people watching to go to ctvoters.org in particular. Connecticut, yeah, there are always interesting articles written both by Luther and others on different facets of election security, locally and nationwide. So, these things affect us. So thank you again, Luther. And I'm not quite sure who's going to be on next week, but we'll be doing remote Zooming for a while until it's safe to drive around. So thank you, Luther.